The Pittsburgh Steelers won't be getting Mike Williams at wide receiver, but could they get another big free agent? We'll talk about that option, the NFL draft option at wide receiver, and why center is being ignored, all here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, with Alan Saunders today. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by by FanDuel. Apologies to FanDuel, but FanDuel, make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 back in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 back if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. As I said before, we're joined by Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. He's back on the show. Now, Alan, shortly before we started recording this podcast, for once, some news broke right before I recorded instead of right after I recorded. I've had a bad run of that for like a week and a half now, but we're on the plus side of things. But it's not a thing that involves.
It doesn't matter when you recorded a podcast for the last week and a half. News would have happened immediately after you recorded, even if you had. There's been no time that's been safe. We had
3 a.m.
at 2:15 in the morning. It does not matter with Omar at the switch. Doesn't matter when you record your podcast. Something is going to happen right after this, because at no point in the last week and change have things stopped happening. So they're going to keep happening.
You're right. You know what? They're going to trade for Justin Jefferson right after this show. Watch it happen. But let's get into the thing that just happened. So Mike Williams just signed for a deal that maxes out at $15 million. Probably has a lot. Up to probably more around like $6 million. But Mike Williams was one of the bigger names on the wide receiver free agent market. He's gone now. And that was a name that I think a lot of people were linking to the Steelers. He was scheduled to have a visit with the Steelers coming up, but signs that deal with the Jets now. So he goes to work with Aaron Rodgers moving forward. But Alan, that kind of puts the Steelers in the situation where, like, okay, well, that's that big name off the board. Tyler Boyd is a guy that you and I have talked about a lot as a Steelers target. But now there's speculation about trade possibilities and big names in that market. Brandon Aiyuk on a 5th-year extension right now with the Niners. He's a guy that some people are talking about. Stefon Diggs with his time with the Bills, and maybe is he over the hill with them? Do they want to get rid of him? Is there a specific target not named Tyler Boyd that you think makes a lot of sense right now for the Steelers to add to their wide receiver room? Or is it just Tyler Boyd?
I mean, I think there's more than Tyler Boyd. I think there are other options out there. I think it's interesting that, like, they're kind of late in getting in this market, right? They traded Deontay Johnson after a number of the top guys had already been signed. You know, didn't seem like they were in on Gabe Davis. Didn't seem like they were in on Calvin Ridley. Didn't seem like they were in on Hollywood Brown. Now, all of a sudden, there's like this late push to get a wide receiver. And, you know, the market's pretty thin. There's not a ton of guys out there, but there are still a bunch of free agents. I think the question is, do they feel like they need to fill a hole, or do they need a star? And are they planning to draft one highly? I think that matters too. You know, if you're going to use your first round pick on a wide receiver, well, I mean, you'd need to trade your first round pick probably to get Brandon Aiyuk, but I don't think you need to do both anyway, right? Like, I don't think this offense requires the level of investment at the wide receiver position to have George Pickens and Brandon Aiyuk and a first round pick. Like, that's overkill. They don't need all that. They need a center and a tackle far more than they need that. So there are guys out there that are good wide receivers, guys like Odell Beckham, guys like Hunter Renfrow, Josh Reynolds from Detroit is a guy I like a lot. Michael Thomas is out there, although probably not a very good scheme fit. So there are guys out there. I just don't know. You know, they talked to a lot of the first round receivers at the combine. Those were guys that I was surprised at the combine. That was obviously before the Johnson trade, of how involved they were. They talked to Rome Odunze. He's probably a top 6, 7 pick. Like, they talked to all the good wide receivers. It sure seemed like they were thinking about drafting wide receiver early. So then if they're going to do that, I don't know. I don't see how they do both of those things. It seems like if they're going to draft a wide receiver early, then it's one of these other guys, these second tier guys. I think Paris Campbell's still out there, Mecole Hardman, Valdez Scantling. I mean, like Michael Gallup. None of these are guys that you're going to be like over the moon to have, but they'll certainly be a wide receiver 2/3 if you need one to go along with a highly drafted rookie in George Pickens. I'm not sure we still have a good sense of the direction they're going here, though.
I feel you on that. I want to save the draft talk for the next segment because that's where we're going after this, and then we'll get to some other things. But just looking at NFL options, it's kind of why I thought like all along, like Tyler Boyd just made the most sense. Even when they had Deontay Johnson and we thought that he'd be there for that. I just felt like, hey, he's a guy who could come in. He could give you solid reps as a veteran. He's not going to be a game breaker, but he can be a game helper. And then you could still rely on Pickens to be your number one. And then you could go in the draft somewhere and get a wide receiver. Even if it's not first round, maybe it's second round, maybe it's third round. This is a deep wide receiver class. You could get some really good guys at other levels of this draft than just the first round. But that's why I for the longest time I said Tyler Boyd. But the option, the idea of trading for a big name wide receiver, Brandon Aiyuk, Stefon Diggs, people keep floating out Justin Jefferson. That ain't gonna happen. Like that would take multiple firsts to make something like that happen. But do you think that the Steelers are in play, or they are trying to work on a trade to get one of a receiver that's currently on a different team that is actually doable?
I think they've certainly checked in, right? I mean, like Omar wouldn't be doing his job if he didn't. I'm sure they've checked in on Aiyuk. I'm sure they've checked in to see if these other teams are Aiyuk, it sure seems like the 49ers are pretty committed to trading one of their receivers. I'm not sure how seriously available the rest of these guys even are. About it, I don't know what kind of answers the Bills and the GM is giving when teams are calling about Stefon Diggs. It should just be get lost, like, and so I don't know. I'm gonna try to trade one of them, but I don't think they're going to give either of them away. I think that's a front office I have a lot of respect for. I don't think they're going to do something dumb. I think they have the cap space to make it work with all of them if they have to. I said on my podcast, I'd be trying to sign Juwan Jenkins to an offer sheet before I traded on Pickens. And if the 49ers are a great way to hold their feet to the fire, if you want to make it even worse, go ahead and make that guy more expensive than they want him to be. I don't see this offense requiring a star wide receiver. I mean, look, the big dig on Arthur Smith the last few years was that he had these star players, Drake London and Kyle Pitts, and he didn't make the most of them. And he also didn't have a quarterback, and he didn't have an offensive line, and they want to run the ball. I don't know. It just doesn't seem like that's what he needs. I look at this offensive line with no center, still got Dan Moore at left tackle. I wouldn't be throwing big-time assets at star wide receivers. I just wouldn't.
I feel you on that. And that's why I want to explore the draft options coming up next, because Mel Kiper Jr. in his mock draft, his latest mock draft, he mocked the Steelers to take Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU with the 20th overall pick. A guy that we were surprised the Steelers did talk to, along with Odunze and Adonai Mitchell and other top receivers in this NFL draft. I want to talk about those options with you, Alan, here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. We'll do that next, and we will get into center late in this show, because it feels like with all the big moves, that's the one position that remains untouched by Omar Khan in this front office. What's going to happen there and other places, that and more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, I want to remind you, this show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the price that you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter, Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, let's shift to the draft a little bit here, looking at options the Steelers could realistically consider here. Now, there's that first tier of wide receivers that you're talking about. Like, for example, in Mel Kiper's mock draft that came out on ESPN yesterday, it's his 3.0 mock draft. He has 3 quarterbacks in the first 3 picks and then 3 receivers in the next 3. And that goes Harrison, Neighbors, and then, like you said, Adunza at 6 to the Giants. So that's the first tier of wide receivers. But then after that, there's a bit of an interesting drop to the next guy. And a lot of people have Brian Thomas Jr. being that next guy. Some people have that being Adonai Mitchell. Some people think that that Ladd McConkey needs to be that next guy. Those guys are all there. But I think those are all first round-ish guys there. If the Steelers were to go get a guy at 20, one, do you think it would make sense with all the other needs they have with corner, with tackle, and center, and other things that they have? And 2, if they did, which of those 3 that I just named, McConkey, Thomas, or Mitchell, would you think would be the best fit?
In my mind, you kind of have these 2 sort of herds of wide receiver, right? Where it's like Harrison, Neighbors, Adunze. Those guys are top 10 picks, certainly, probably top 8 picks. Like I'd wager a good amount of money. And then you have like A.D. Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, Ladd McConkey, Keon Coleman, Troy Franklin. I feel like these guys are all sort of like end of the first round, beginning of the second round, 25 to 35, I think is where all those guys end up. And Brian Thomas is like the monkey in the middle, right? Like he's the lone guy standing there. Like he's not close to Adunze and Neighbors, but I think he's very, very consistently above all the rest of those guys. And I think the real question will be, does a team reach for him because of that, right? Like he's so much better than the next best wide receiver. Does a team at 10 or 11 or 12 or 13 say, no, we can't let this guy go any farther? Because I think he belongs about where the Steelers pick, around the 18, 19, 20 range. But I could also see him being a guy that teams will reach and try to pull off the board early just because they don't want to wait for that next guy to come who's way down the list. And so I think he's a really hard guy to project in terms of where he's going to be drafted. The easy thing to project is how he looks in the offense, and that's great. I mean, the Steelers have had a lot of players that I think are pretty similar to him over the years, and they've been pretty good. I mean, I really think some people have kind of laid this Martavis Bryant comparison on him, and I don't think it's too far off. Like he's a big guy, he gets down the field well, he has great hands. I think you can do a lot worse than Brian Thomas at 20. I understand there are other needs. I don't know who snaps the ball right now. If they had to go play a game tomorrow, could be troublesome, but I think he's really good and really worth a 20 pick if that's the route they want to take.
I feel you on that. I love Adonai Mitchell. Like that, if I was getting a guy at 20, that's who I would go get if I had to pick a wide receiver. But I also love quite a few guys after the first round. And I just like let's look at, for example, if we just stick with Mel Kiper's mock here, like let's look at the guys who go after 20 when the Steelers pick Brian Thomas. Graham Barton, the multi-talented offensive lineman out of Duke. He goes right after that. Nate Wiggins, cornerback out of Clemson, who flew at the combine. Cooper DeJean, who a lot of people look at. Tyler Guyton, the offensive tackle of Oklahoma. Xavier Worthy, TJ Tampa, Xavier Leggett, Amarius Mims at 30. Like I have to think that, especially when I look at Amarius Mims, when I look at Cooper DeJean, when I look at Nate Wiggins, Graham Barton, like those type of guys in positions the Steelers absolutely need right now, those make a lot more sense at 20 than getting a Bryant Thomas, especially when I look to that next tier of wide receivers, that second round group of guys. I'm a big Roman Wilson guy in this draft class. If the Steelers land him in the round 2, like that is your, like, if you're a Steelers fan, you should be running out in the street with a flag, just being like, we did it, boys. Like, I feel like that's the kind of hit that Roman Wilson could be if they get him in the second round.
But receivers in a row there that I really like, sort of right about where their second round pick is. He's one of them. Xavier Legette from South Carolina, Ricky Pearsall from Florida, Malachi Corley from Western Kentucky, Jalynn Polk from Washington. Like, all these guys are second round picks, and I think it's and there's more than that. This is a deep wide receiver draft. I think there's talented players into the third round where they have 2 picks. I just wonder, well, they have to get somebody that's going to start right away. Are they comfortable? I mean, they did it with George Pickens. They waited until the second round, took George Pickens in the second round, and started him day 1. Do you think they would be comfortable doing that again and saying, we're not going to get another starting wide receiver in free agency? You're not going to sign, Tyler Boyd or Hunter Renfrow or any of these guys. It's just going to be George and a rookie, and maybe they fill in with another vet or somewhere else. Like, is that enough? And is it enough if it's a second round pick? I don't know. That's tough.
That is tough, and that's the question. There is, would that? I mean, again, like you said, George Pickens, but George Pickens was also a unique situation because he was a guy that was injured, and like people had questions about his character, and so they were like, "Oh man, can't pick that guy in the first round." The Steelers got him in the second, and I'd say they got great value for doing that. But I look at these guys here. I think Roman Wilson would be ready day 1. I think Ricky Pearsall could be ready day 1, and especially if the Steelers do sign another wide receiver like a Tyler Boyd to like just a not so heavy contract, so like a decently sized contract for that. Then you could have that guy be the veteran of the room. George Pickens is still your number 1, and then if you get a Roman Wilson or a Ricky Pearsall or a Troy Franklin out of Oregon, one of those type of, or I really like Malachi Corley. I think that he's another guy that would be a great fit. You add them. Then all of a sudden you have those 3. You still have Van Jefferson, who you signed in free agency, and you have Calvin Austin. That's a good receiver room. I think that's the sweet spot, is the second round, not necessarily the first.
And that's why I think maybe there's been some hesitation about Tyler Boyd, because if you look at this cluster of second round guys, it's a lot of slot players. Pearsall's probably a slot. Corley's a slot. Wilson certainly could be a slot. I don't know if he definitely will be. Polka's maybe more of an outside guy, but I certainly wouldn't say that he couldn't play inside, and Troy Franklin could very well be a slot. So I think if they're looking at these day 2 guys and saying like, oh, okay, it's going to be a second round pick, it's a slot. Well, then that's why I would want Mike Williams instead of Tyler Boyd. But then who's the next big outside guy that you turn to? If it's not Williams, is it Michael Gallup? Is it, a guy like DJ Chark? I don't know. There are fewer of those guys. Josh Reynolds, I guess, could do that job. I don't know that he has, but he certainly is big enough too. Where do they look if that's what they decide that they're going to do in the second round, and how does that impact free agency? I think it's an interesting dynamic. I'm kind of with you. I think I like the second round wide receivers, and I think that would lead me to maybe prefer having a guy who's more of an outside receiver if they're going to sign one more guy in free agency.
I feel you. I think that's a sweet spot, especially because, again, the Steelers' needs, which we'll get into center in the next segment here, the Steelers' needs in the first round, and I'm not even sure center has to be the first round, but just getting a guy in the second round allows you to still get a corner, a tackle, a player who's going to be a significant boost there. And again, we're talking, like we just talked about how in passing, in the first 6 picks, 3 receivers, 3 quarterbacks. According to Mel Kiper's mock draft, again, this is just Mel Kiper's just using this because this is just the most recent major mock draft that came out right before this show. He has 5 quarterbacks going in the first 12 picks. So, like Bo Nix and I'm not with that. Like Bo Nix at 12, okay, y'all take that. Go ahead, do that. That's totally fine. But like with that being done, like I'm looking at the board here, just doing some quick calculating. You have Joe Alt off the board. You have J.C. Latham off the board. You have Troy Fatano off the board. Terry and Arnold, Talisa Fuaga. And so like those are the guys that are gone at the positions that you absolutely need. Quinion Mitchell's off the board. So you got like 3 corners, maybe 4 or 5 offensive tackles there. And Jackson Powers-Johnson's still available. Like, that's a lot of really good options at either 3 of those positions, which the Steelers absolutely need to get still in this draft class.
Yeah, they have more needs than they have assets to fill those needs. And that's the biggest reason why I kind of look at the idea of trading a lot of money for an expensive player. And it just doesn't seem to make sense when you have that many needs and not enough assets to really fill them all in a reasonable amount of time anyway. Like, they don't have that much cap space. They have some. They have some draft capital, first to second and 2/3, but it's not, it's not like they're picking 10th. These are not surefire day one guys that you're getting at 20 and 51, let alone beyond that. And so I don't know. It's hard to see them making that kind of move based on everything that we're just talking about.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard to see them make that type of move in this situation. But let's talk about center next, because that's a position that you and I talked about. I mean, even in the season, we were talking about, man, they got to move on from Mason Cole next year. But here we are recording this on March 19th, the day of my father's birthday. Happy birthday, Dad. And they still have not addressed center. In fact, they released Mason Cole and haven't gotten anyone to replace him. We'll talk about what they're doing next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, we'll remind you this show is also sponsored by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. Say goodbye to busted brackets, because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament. That's right. If you're putting your bracket in for college basketball right now, you may be thinking, man, if the wrong team loses, I'm out. Well, that's never the case with FanDuel, because you can always be looking at the biggest upset or a #1 seed going all the way. It's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $200 back in bonus bets with your first $5 bet or more. But that's right, $200 back that you can use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all with the $200. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, and you can start betting on college hoops until they cut down the nets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon for new customers to get up to $200 back in bonus bets if your first $5 bet or more wins. And that's on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, what the heck are the Steelers doing at center, man? Because they had done nothing, and now the field's basically gone. I don't think there's even a starter-capable center available in free agency. We talk about them not pigeonholing themselves into doing something in the draft. This kind of looks like they're pigeonholing themselves to having to pick a center pretty early.
Chris, when was the last time you snapped a football? I'm just wondering.
I mean, actually, I did it the other day. I did a long snapping even. So, Christian Kuntz, I know you just signed a contract, but watch out, buddy.
3-year deal. Kuntz is locked in. They don't. Kuntz should be like.
He's probably partying right now. You kidding me? He just got a 3-year deal. Andrew Kane.
He should be working on some under center. That's all I'm saying. Like, you should get out there and get some work in, buddy, because you're the #1 center when first OTA practice rolls around right now. I guess they have Nate Herbig there. Listen, I like Nate Herbig a lot. I think he's a good player. I think he can start in the NFL. If they thought he was a good center and good enough to play center, why didn't they try him last year when Mason Cole couldn't even get the ball to the quarterback for half of the second half of the year, and they tried every other option of player combination? Like, they started their third string quarterback. Like, it's not like they were hesitant to try new things just to see if it might work. That was a perfect opportunity to see if Nate Herbig might be good enough to play center. And the fact that they didn't tells me they're pretty sure that he's not. Yet they still have, Brian Allen from the Los Angeles Rams is the last guy out there that's like played center, been a starting center, and is available. And look, there was a report today that I believe it was Kuiper, but don't quote me on that one.
Totally quoting you.
Teams are having are coming up with some medical problems with Jackson Powers-Johnson. and that and so now what was really 4 realistic center options falls to 3, maybe, if that's the case. And look, of those 4 guys, I mean, I talked to some people at the combine about this. There's a lot of love for Graham Barton and what he can do as a prospect, but he hasn't played center since his freshman year in college.
Right.
You can't draft that guy and just assume that he's going to be the starting center. Did you all not watch the 2021 season highlight film? Do we not remember how this just happened? Like, that can't be the plan either. Zach Frazier would be great. If Powers Johnson, if they checked out him medically, that would be great. I just don't know how you go into a draft saying we absolutely have to get one of these 3 guys. I don't know how it works.
Yeah, and I know that there's still Connor Williams out there, but he also had a pretty rough ACL tear.
There's apparently been a report that he might retire.
Yeah, so like that's why he's still a free agent. So I know some people are going to be like, "What about him?" That's why it's what about him. But yeah, man, like, this is just a rough spot to be in. Now, maybe there's this possibility. Call me crazy. This is just me spitballing. I'm not saying this is what they're doing, but I thought about this. James Daniels is a guy who is, can do a little bit of center. What if the plan is, instead of drafting a center, you draft like a guy like Fatanu or a guy like Barton, who you move to guard, and Daniels is the one who plays center. And then you have maybe a bigger line that way, where Daniels is a guy that he wasn't dominant at guard. He was good and efficient at guard. And if he could be good and efficient at center, and then you get another young guard to be there, then maybe you try center again later. Or if Daniels doesn't work out or you don't re-sign him to a longer deal, does that make maybe that's their hidden play here? Because I just things aren't mathing right now.
Well, I think that makes more sense than Nate Herbig. Daniels had a whole year as center. Half a year at center with the Bears. He played center in college. He was probably supposed to be a center when he got drafted. And just from talking to him over the years, a very smart guy. You sort of get the sense, and not that Nate Herbig's not smart. He went to Stanford, for crying out loud, so smarter than me. But, I think you get the sense that James Daniels has already been kind of a cerebral guy who's been one of the leaders sort of technically on this offensive line. He's a guy that a lot of other guys already go to when they want questions about their technique and they want help with stuff. So I think that shift to center would be pretty natural for him. I think Nate Herbig could be a good starting guard. My only hang up on this is the same one as like James Daniels, 2 years on the Steelers. Chris, you're at practice a lot, I almost as much as I am. Have you ever seen him pick up a football and snap just one time, even playing around?
Nope.
So, like, does he not want to do it? Is he no longer comfortable? Like, what? Like, most of the time, look, we saw Zach Gentry go out there and take some snaps every once in a while, just in the 1 in 5 million chance that the Steelers needed him to be their quarterback, right? Like, we'll see, some cornerbacks go over there in the punt return line and take a couple punts just in case you'll lose a punt returner or 2 in game and you're stuck and you need something. I never even saw the Steelers do like a just in case thing with James Daniels. So why? And without having an answer to why, it's hard to sit here and say, oh, I think that's their plan. It could be, but there's this big thing hanging over it. Like I don't understand why they wouldn't have had him do more of it over the years. It's not like their center position has just been locked down. They didn't even really dress a traditional backup center most of last year.
Yeah.
So you really would think if they thought that James Daniels was willing or good at center that he would have. I don't know. Doesn't quite make sense. Certainly looks like on paper it could be an option. Just not sure if it actually is or it isn't.
All right, Alan. Putting you on the spot here.
Oh, okay.
The Steelers starting center for 2024 is.
Oh, man.
On the spot. I said it.
Not on the roster right now. Is that a cop-out?
Boo! Get him out of here. Give me a name. Give me a name.
Zach Frazier.
Okay, that's a name. That's a name. Zach Frazier, who made me wait an hour and a half after the combine was finishing up.
Wasn't Zach's fault. Don't blame Zach.
It wasn't Zach's fault.
Nice.
It was NFL teams that were asking for 1,000 medicals because
Zach is a good player. Which is like the dumbest thing to care about. Like we all know broken legs heal. Like it's not like it was a ligament or something.
Yeah.
I'll say I don't think that what I know about Omar Khan jives with the idea of him taking a center in the first round. It does not seem like the positional value that I think they're going to adhere to. And I think Zach Frazier is the second best center. And honestly, I said all this year in college football that he was the best center in the country. And I know Powers Johnson is getting picked way ahead of him, but I don't really think there's a big difference between those guys year one. Maybe Powers Johnson has more upside, like long-term, but like if I had to start one of those guys September 8th, 2024, I think I'd pick Frazier anyway. And so I think that's why Zach Frazier, they may have to trade up in the second round to make sure they get him, because I think he's out of 51 range, but that's my pick.
That's the thing is that if you
want it bold, and you got it right there, by the way.
Would you say? Yeah, that's bold.
Put me on the spot. You got a bold prediction. So.
We got a bold prediction. Trading up, second round, Zach Frazier, bang, starting center. That's what I was talking about. That's why I brought you on.
Who's the first round pick?
And that's a Super Bowl claim. But look, Alan, see that I like this idea, and I've said for a while that like if they don't go in center, you got to go second round, or you might be looking at like Cedric Van Pran in the third round if he's still there.
I'd be okay with him, but you got to get him. Like you can't
play around with.
How do you run a draft where there's one guy on the board at your position and you have to take him? You just have to trade up to then and take him. Like, I don't know. Would they take Van Pran in the second round? Like, I don't think that's great value compared to where he's been projected. But if Frazier's already off the board, Barton's off the board, they don't have a center, I don't see how they could let 51 go by without taking him.
Right. It seems like that would just be a problem. I got to say, I like Bo Limmer's measurables. I like he's 6'5", he's
there
big.
There are later guys that I like. I like Hunter Norzad from Penn State a lot. He's a really interesting guy. Was an FCS guy. Was at now I'm gonna forget which one it was. It was either Cornell or Colgate, and now I can't remember one of those two. I think Cornell. He was at Cornell. And transferred to Penn State. He's played all 5 positions. They love that. But I think he has some like starter upside that is different from a guy who's like a day 3 pick. But you can't draft those guys and start them. You've got to then find another center. If you're talking about a day 3 pick, you've got to go find another center somewhere. And where is it? Well, why are we talking about the Steelers trading for a center instead of starting the show trading for a wide receiver? What's the center trade market like? There isn't one. That's why
there isn't one. That's not a thing.
That's what they really need.
They do. They really need a center. And the thing is that, we were just talking about, about drafting a wide receiver in the second round. If you do that, you're passing up on the centers in the second round. So then that's the tricky part about this. We can all say what we're excited about, what we think that the Steelers should do. And, it'd be great if they got this guy. But every time you're picking one position, you're passing on another. And center is that position that if they don't address it in free agency or the draft, they're going to be expecting a player to move over to that position and start there. That's not their natural spot, and hoping for that to happen, and then potentially having to revisit this problem all throughout 2024. That's why center is something. We'll get more into center. We'll get more into film breakdowns and talking about why this guy or that guy and answers like that. And who knows? Probably right after we finish recording this, they'll trade for a center. They'll get who knows what they'll do. But the Steelers, they've had a habit of
coming out of retirement to sign with the Steelers.
What'd you say?
Jason Kelsey's coming out of retirement.
Now that don't do that to me. Don't do that to me, Saunders. That would just be
calling me back to redo the show if that happened.
Oh God, that would be the nightmare. Please, if you do that, Jason, I'm talking to you right now, to your New Heights podcast. If you do that to me, Jason, please wait until like the next day at least, so I can talk about it on the next show. Don't do it to me like in 5 minutes after this show. I beg of you. I can't take it anymore. It's happening 3 times last week. I can't do another episode. I can't do another emergency podcast in the middle of the week. Anyways. He's Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Thanks, Alan, for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. It's always great having you here. Let people know they can find you, follow you, get more your work, and anything that you guys got coming up.
Yeah, I mean, just trying to scramble and keep up with the news as best as everybody else is. And, going to the owners meeting next week. So excited about that. Should have lots of good stuff from Orlando. And, go check it out. SteelersNow.com.
Absolutely. I'm Chris Carter, the Locked On Steelers podcast. He's Alan Saunders. Find me, Chris Carter, on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com for all that there. And Monday through Friday, I'm here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, breaking down your Pittsburgh Steelers every single day on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Thanks again, everybody. Back tomorrow with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.